Rich. Hi, Mark. Thank you for joining us on another episode of GRC Me.
Hi, Megan. Pleased as punch to be here.
Fantastic.
Hi, Megan. Likewise.
Wonderful. All right. Well, let's get into the conversation today. So, Rich, we were talking offline before today's episode about the importance of risk quantification for the insurance technology space. Can you expand on that impact of risk quantification? What will it have on the insurtech for our listeners?
Sure. A little background, by the way, on this topic. So my first book, which I co-authored with Doug Hubbard, it's called How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity Risk. And I'm not here today to sell books. I don't make any money in books at all, unfortunately. But that book, it's the only security book that has been required reading for the Society of Actuaries exam as of 2018. I don't know if it still is. And so there's a lot of relevance there to at least some of my scholarship on this topic. What I found out, though, early on, at least with insurance, they were doing more benchmarking with companies. So they didn't have actuarial tables. They didn't have automobile accidents going back decades. And so how insurance was doing things is I was at a company at the time, and they looked at our company like, oh, you're a SaaS company. Everyone seems to wear hoodies. You're in the Bay Area. We'll look at other companies like that and kind of like do this and do that. And what they didn't do, though, is so they gave us a rate that was just kind of like, oh, you look like them. We look at other 20, and you look and talk and walk like them. What they didn't look at the value at risk. They didn't look at the fact that we were persisting a couple trillion records of PII in the cloud at the time. And they didn't take into consideration also the strength of controls or anything like that, really. And I get it. Insurance was easy, relatively easy to get back then. It was relatively cheap. Cyber insurance, that is. Not the case anymore, not with the advent of ransomware. So things have really changed. So the methodologies and approach from an insurance perspective were really benchmark based. They weren't risk based. So in our case, for example, where we had a lot of value at risk, the insurance company actually ended up taking on a lot more risk than they suspected. I mean, it would have been one of the largest breaches in history, and we would have quickly drained all the coffers of that money, and we weren't nearly as protected as we thought we were. The insurance companies had an opportunity to make a lot more money too in the process if they would have taken into consideration the value at risk and controls, or even potentially denied insurance, which they weren't doing back in the day. I ended up buying 20 million more insurance, but the bottom line is that there is a need now, again, with the advent of ransomware, with the fact that it's just been, it's been really bad for the insurance companies who owned a lot of risk, right? Had a lot of policy out there. So there's a lot of drivers that really need better quantitative risk management. They need to take in consideration value at risk. They need to take into consideration control strength. Listen, you're not going to get every jot and every tittle. You're not going to be able to understand everything, but that's why it's called risk management. Risk management is like, hey, gosh, I don't know everything, but I'm going to make a bet. And I want to, if I can beat the house, then great. And so whatever information I can bring to bear to my decision-making, I want to have. I know that's a lot of words, but this is, it's real, it's happening now, and there's a lot of opportunity to really do better. And I think it's quite exciting, obviously.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, Richard. The kind of how much cyber insurance should I buy was one of the things we kept hearing again and again when we were interviewing like CISOs and leaders in this space last year, as we were trying to understand how we could help our customers make better risk-informed business decisions. The other key one that kind of led us down the path to actually building out risk quantification was about how to communicate risk effectively to the board. And that was really one of the pivotal things, along with the kind of like how much insurance to buy, that kind of led us towards building Risk Cloud Quantify. I'd really be interested in your experience and how you have used risk quantification to explain and detail risk to the board and the decisions you're making.
Sure. I'll tell you about how I thought about it and then how I'm actually thinking about it now, even most recently. So I held to the perspective that I didn't need to show the sausage factory to the E team or to the board, to audit committee, whatnot. I was doing the quant stuff. I mean, I had the skills, I knew how to do it. I was, pretty handy at it. So, but I didn't feel a need to go in and show a distribution or an S curve or, pick your statistical poison. I didn't feel a need to go and share that with the team. Albeit most board members are more educated than and quantitatively savvy. I mean, listen, most of those folks eat risk for breakfast, right? And they know, I mean, what is that GE? Jeff Immelt had his undergraduate in applied maths from Dartmouth, and he had quantitative MBA from Harvard. And he's a smart guy, but he was a dumb one in the room. A lot of physicists and whatnot, if you know anything about GE's business. But I didn't feel a need to present quantitative data at that time. This is important to say. I was presenting decisions that we were making. And if they asked the rationale why, so it's more of a qualitative discussion, because you don't have a lot of time to stand in front of them and what have you. I think that's changing though, and I do think the appetite is definitely more on, they want to see quantitative stuff. And I think there is much more of an appreciation for being able to share uncertainty. I know people are uncomfortable with that, but I think that's a reality. It was interesting. There was some research done. It's at a university, Merced, out of their cognitive science group. They were working with NASA, and there was a problem with, I think it was in the Himalayas, with alpacas dying when it gets really cold. And this is devastating, not just for the alpacas, but for their livelihood. And one of the problems they were having was with people who are not statistically trained, being able to look at forecasts about weather specifically, and then basically pick up the bat phone. I don't know what they were doing to communicate with, this is actually NASA and the Red Cross, to actually get alpaca coats and whatnot out there, right? It was interesting. What they found was that actually untrained people who were potentially even uneducated were far more better at making accurate forecasts when they're actually looking at real distributions, not the stuff that we tend to do in the security industry to communicate risk, actual stuff like, things look like kind of like camel lumps and things like that. And with, credible intervals, whatnot, they were much better. Both the trained and untrained people were much better at making decisions that had life or death, in this case for alpacas, and for the livelihood. So I thought that was very interesting. I know it's kind of a little bit of an aside, but I suppose there's this prejudice that we have that people are going to be uncomfortable with seeing statistical materials. And here I am, guy who wrote the book on it, and I'm really turning a leaf, but it's also being asked for. People want this data. People who are doing credit want this data. People who are doing insurance want this data. Executives want this data presented in a way that, it retains our uncertainty without obscuring our certainty. At this point, typically when I'm talking publicly, I then say, P.S. die, heat maps die, but I won't say that here. Right. That was a lot, sorry, but true stories.
I love that. Well, I like that you talked about just this level of comfort. Well, you're talking about kind of a shift that you're starting to see of wanting to know more of the story and giving more space and airtime to understand it, and really having those that are more familiar with it wanting to lead in, and giving an opportunity to those that do this to help to defend what's going on within the business, and also help to inform strategic opportunities. So many times
I would say this, I want to make sure I did this point, I might have made it unclear, because this is why I told the alpaca story, is that there is industry drivers that are requiring reporting where we understand impact as money, as a range of loss, and probabilities. I mean, if you look at standards, you're seeing that it's all in there. There is a belief or mythology, at least historically, that executives and untrained people are allergic and get the heebie-jeebies if you start using statistical language, and or goodness forbid you show a curve distribution. They're like, ooh. There isn't a lot of support in the research. The research is actually the exact opposite, that people are actually able to make better risk decisions with what's been used in the past 100+ years in statistics. Go figure. I guess these engineers, life scientists, physicists, et cetera, actuaries, maybe they know something about presenting uncertainty.
Exactly right. Exactly. Well, and Mark, I'm sure that is a lot of what you're seeing as well. And so one other thing we were talking offline, the three of us, was about how people, processes, and technology are all used to help to project real loss. And so would love to hear both of your thoughts on that. Rich, to start with you, what do you mean by that? How can people be able to predict or project losses?
Right. So what we were talking about, so there's two sides of the coin. Previously, I was talking about, risk and, forecasts, enterprise risk level sorts of things. That's what my first book deals with, by the way, where you're confronting, kind of irreducible uncertainty. Like you have this big black box, which is an enterprise and its third and fourth parties. How do you go about, forecasting probable future loss, right? And all that stuff. And so my first book covers that. But the reality is, from an operational perspective, as a CISO or as a risk leader, I'm in the business of deploying capabilities. I got systems made up of capabilities. So I'm hiring people, I'm buying technology and building processes out. And so part of my job as an operational leader now, there's a risk leader and operational leader, is to be able to understand, are my capabilities that I've deployed, are they scaling? Meaning over time, as we measure over time, are they keeping up with the volume of risk that my business is creating? So successful businesses are in the business, if they're successful, exposing more value to more people through more channels at higher velocity. If you're successful, you should be doing it because you want to make more money, right? And then on the other side, you have bad guys who are in the business of, stealing your shorts and getting really good at that. And here we sit in the middle of security. So we have these volumetric kind of activities happening on either side of us. And I'm spending money and doing things. And I want to know, are my controls, are they scaling? Are they working? So we're in the business, we're really, from a metrics perspective, operational metrics, we're in the business of measuring our capabilities. Are they scaling? Or if they're deficient, if they don't meet our risk tolerance, we discover that through measurement. Can I measure that they're actually accelerating to the goals they need to meet? Or am I decelerating? So that was the conversation we had. And I don't mean to get overly technical, but that's the other side of the coin. So you have the risk side, big black box, and then you have the operational side where you actually have telemetry coming from your systems and you're trying to measure. And so those two things can really work together, meaning you can actually then have your risk, what was a big black box, irreducible uncertainty, you can start having that be informed by empirically, mathematically unambiguous and auditable data. It's not the complete story still, but it's a lot better. So yeah, so I write a lot of this stuff and think about it all day long. So, it's interesting to me. I don't know if it is to anyone else.
It resonates with me actually, because that was definitely a lot of what we heard about, like wanting to have a seat at the table about how risk, like a CISO, can support the business in the growth that they're looking to drive. And in order to do that, they felt like they needed to bring more to the table than a heat map or a 1 to 5 scale, or trust me, we need to go work on this area or put resources in this area. And kind of risk quantification was starting to kind of help provide a little bit more empirical understanding about okay, I see where we want to go. I have a better understanding about where we are now, and I can therefore kind of join the conversation about what resources or where I need to devote my attention to support where the business needs to go. And then you have that seat at the table that I think a lot of CISOs are looking for.
Yeah.
And are required to have these days, right?
Yeah. I want to be able to say, if someone, let's say audit committee says, hey, Rich, great presentation at the board. We'd like to meet with you for 3 hours. Typically that's, that would give any CISO the McBurps. They'd be like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen now? But I want to be able to have that conversation and say, hey, look, this is how, maybe goodness forbid, I shared a heat map, and an upper corner is the maroon bleeding square with 10 things in it that I say, we're going to work on those things. I should be able, even if I do that, and people listen, hey, I like risk art just as much as the next guy or gal. So, if I present that, I want to be able to, say, but here's how we're rank ordering things. And this is why. It's based on a return on controls. We've taken into consideration our, value at risk, state of controls, our capabilities. And while we don't know everything, we know something. And based on that, that's why we're making these investments. We're using a consistent ruler or measurement stick to understand this. Does it mean that we're absolutely empirically going to lose this much money in the future and write a check? No, I don't know that. But I'm being consistent, right? I'm being accurate with some precision, but mostly accurate. I'm being consistent about how I go about measuring things and trying to reduce any sort of arbitrariness so I can make the best bet possible. That's the outcome that I'm shooting for. And listen, that's what people do in sales. That's what your sales leaders do, by the way, when they go and at LogicGate. That's what they do. They do some sort of forecast and they kind of rank order things based on they don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty. This is what your CFO does. This is what everyone else does this stuff. and we get to as well.
I love that. Now, is that what you'd mentioned your books, and many of us know that you're a published author on the topic at hand, but is that what inspired you, or tell us a little bit about inspired you to put pen to paper, share these thoughts with the broader audience?
Sure. I may have said this in our last talk, but one of my favorite quotes, necessity is the mother of invention and boredom is its father, right? And so I was at Kaiser Permanente, and largest health maintenance organization in the US, just big company. And I was in there, I started there early on just running vulnerability management, which is with hundreds of thousands of assets, and expanded to GRC, data science, and all this, pen testing and all that jazz. And what I was getting back from my assessment folks, these are pen testers, AppSec folks, and whatnot, was, great, industry leading cats, right? And I'm getting this information back, and it was very inconsistent, and it was obvious. And listen, Kaiser had things that people put their bodies into, and things they put into their bodies, and everything in between. And we're talking about critical. Literally, this is critical infrastructure. And so I was like, gosh, this just doesn't feel good. I kind of feel like Billy Beane. Billy Beane's like, we're losing a lot. This doesn't feel good. There's got to be some better, open A's, Billy Beane. Moneyball. And so I, like him, I start, prone to wander. I started looking at people typically outside of technology, who are dealing with a lot of uncertainty, where they were, I ran into people I'd call measurement experts, people doing, again, statistical physics, life sciences, actuarial stuff, reading broadly and meeting field folks. And that's how I ran across Doug Hubbard. And listen, Doug didn't invent the methods that he pushes for, that now have influenced FAIR and other things like that. FAIR found its roots in his first two books. He just provided a better API for the rest of us to understand how to use these methods to make better measurement. So that's kind of my path and how I got here. And I just really, I do really like I like the problem space, and I think it's very needful. And I don't know, it's a kind of a magical mystery tour. I enjoy it. What can I say? And so I've written a second book because also I'm a masochist. And so, right. And so, yeah. There you go.
What could we expect from that book?
I think most of the people who really enjoyed my first book will be profoundly disappointed in this one. This one is awful. It's probably 40% code. It's probabilistic programming, and it's hardcore Bayesian stuff. I mean, there's some fun narratives and history, and then it just gets right into sadness with really hard to think about stuff. So I expect that a lot of people will buy it expecting it to be kind of like the Green Book, relatively easy, and then they'll start reading and it'll be like smooth sailing. Then boom, that's
right.
I jest a lot, but it is readable for those who are concept only readers. But if you are it's not that kind of girlfriend or not that kind of boyfriend. You got to spend all your time with it. It's hard.
Not for the faint of heart. You really want to be a student of the subject, right?
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Yeah.
And please excuse me for all the mistakes. I'm a statistical API user, but I'm not a statistician. But we do our best.
Yes, absolutely. So what's next for you? So you're pouring your thoughts into this really interesting new book that some will value and need, and others that will be educated on, maybe a new topic, a new way of looking at this. But what are some other things that you're working on right now? What's going on in your career trajectory, your life, during this, kind of change in your life?
Sure. Realize that we thought our first book was going to be hated. It's long, gangly title, pea green cover, we knew that its value starting at page 100 was really good for pressing flowers. So we knew that for sure, but we didn't realize it's one of the best selling security books ever. Right. And we didn't plan that, yes. Just like Led Zeppelin didn't plan Stairway to Heaven to be great. And I'm sorry, making a false comparison, but I don't know if this book will be hated or not. So I suspect that it will. And so my career will be in answering a lot of hate mail and tweets for several months. That'll be kind of what I'll be doing. I'm going to go do some sort of CISO gig. I sold my company, and so and I'm now guy at large, and I do a lot of advisory work with startups, I still do a lot of training on quantitative stuffs as well, but I probably will end up, going back to some of the CISO gig. The things that that seem to come my way are definitely more along the quantitative side of things. Companies that are really heavy into data science, typically they have big massive data platforms, and they're looking for people who kind of can play in that space fluently. So yeah.
Well, Rich, I am glad that our paths crossed. I think it's around this common interest of risk quantification. I know, Mark, you dedicate a lot of your daytime and probably weekend time thinking about this subject as well. Mark, tell us a little bit about the work that you and the LogicGate team have been working on as well.
Yeah, we've been researching this for a good year and a half now, and not actually looking at this from should we build risk quantification. It was far more an understanding about how do we help our customers make better risk-informed business decisions. And it involved a lot of conversations with a lot of people like Richard, people in the practice, analysts, experts in the industry. And again, we heard this kind of same story around an ad hoc kind of accumulation of information from various systems to go and stand up in front of the board or their boss and kind of make the case for, we need resources for this, we need to buy a tool for this, we need to strengthen controls in this area. And so risk quantification, we felt, was like one of the most important first steps we could help our customers take towards being able to have that conversation from a more kind of educated and solid footing, really. But we definitely see it as a stepping stone and not the end of the journey. So we've built risk quantification into the platform. It's using the FAIR model right now, but it's the beginning of a journey towards helping our customers use the risk cloud from LogicGate to kind of pull these various sources of information together to use risk quantification and to be able to present that in a format to whoever the consumer is, in a way that makes sense for the business decisions that they're making. And I think we already have a lot of that information in our platform from how customers use us today. Risk quantification is a really important next step in that journey. And we're constantly iterating and moving down that path towards helping our customers make better risk-informed business decisions. And that's really what a big portion of our product team is focused on and researching. And it's been an exciting journey so far. I think we've all learned a lot. We get to speak to people like Richard and others, and it feels like the way that the industry needs to go. And we're excited to be a part of that journey.
Can I say something to what you just said? Yeah. For those of you, for the millions of fans listening, they didn't pay me or ask me to say this, but the way I got connected with LogicGate, every place I've been has had at least one GRC of one type or another, and they were all mostly sad and disappointed because the businesses where I was, they just didn't scale because of the data model and the platform approach. The world's changed, right? Now we get great things in the cloud that's auto scaling and whatnot, but there's an expressivity and power that's necessary in GRC because we're dealing with every company is a snowflake, right? And you're dealing with different sorts of architectures, your different concepts of assets with different levels of decomposition and how they relate one another. Now you have third-party and fourth-party risk. So you have this, this what I'd call really a network graph of complexity that's changing and expanding and undulating. And so you, as a risk leader, particularly as a Fortune 10, all the way down to growth companies, I really wanted something that could handle the legacy, but also accommodate more cloud native sorts of asset concepts as well. And so what I found out about LogicGate is that they were taking a graph-based approach to how they understand things. Then when you overlay with that more of the probabilistic sorts of stuff or quantitative risk management, to me it seemed like directionally, if I were to take what was a brownfield market and reinvigorate it, this is the approach that I would take. So we started talking because I was just excited nerd you're right, and wanted to chat. So they didn't ask me to say this, but I just think I think that, and in fact, if you were to look at my first book and go way past the first areas for pressing flowers and get to the latter chapters, I get into entity and data marting and whatnot. But I talk about how you would want to add probabilistic programming and whatnot into how you do your BI and whatnot. And that was using kind of old, because I wrote the book 5 years ago, that was using, dimensional modeling, right? Ideally, it would have, and I didn't write about it because no one cared at the time, we were using graph stuff, but the graph approach absolutely is the correct way if you're really into modeling to doing this. So I just, I would encourage those of you who are out there who have experienced sadness with your ability to model, right, risk using a GRC to give LogicGate a shake. I had a chance to look at the early risk quant solution as well, and the visual domain specific language, the draggy droppy stuff that they have, and it really does seem quite accessible. Despite all the nerd stuff I said before, it actually looked very, very accessible. So yeah, I just wanted to share that because they didn't tell me to say that. I'm just a nice guy.
Not a paid commercial. Well, Rich, I appreciate that. I appreciate it because of the lens in which you're coming. You literally wrote the book on it. You study it. You're a student of this space. Mark, you work on this product day in and day out. And having both your perspectives here, just share a little bit about where the market is, where it's been, and where it could be going, I think is valuable for all of our listeners today. So Rich and Mark, thank you so much for joining us on another episode of GRC Me.
My pleasure. Keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you.